Today's episode is brought to you by habwin.com. Check them out for some great cashback deals at www.habwin.com/getpoker cashback like a pro. Hey, poker people, it's Sky Matsuhashi, and this is the Smart Poker Study Podcast. In episode 136 last week, I discussed how to implement game tape in your poker studies. This is the most beneficial yet neglected study technique, so you've gotta do it. Hey, poker people, spring is in the air, birds are growing, and the grass is chirping, and you're listening to my podcast. I love it, and I love you for tuning in, for sharing with friends, and for all the ways that you support me. Thank you so very much. Honestly, I mean that. I'm so appreciative of all of you. Did you see Fate of the Furious? Don't worry about any spoilers here if you haven't seen it yet. But man, it was incredible. It's supposedly first of the final 3 movies in the franchise. And I tell you, they just keep getting better and better. I really just can't get enough of Dominic Toretto and his entire crew. You know, they're a family. And my whole family loved it. And now we've got to go back to the very beginning. And we're going to watch them all with the kids because they've only seen parts 5, 6, 7, and 8 now. So if you haven't seen it yet, get your butt to the theater right now so that you could still catch Guardians of the Galaxy 2 this weekend. Oh, and make sure you never watch the movie trailers. They don't do any good, and they ruin so many surprises. After watching Furious 8, or F8, or Fate of the 8, whatever, I went home and I watched the trailer for the first time, and I counted 11 spoilers and 3 major spoilers. So do yourself a favor, stay surprised during the movie, skip the trailers, please, please, please. Anywho, it's on to the pokers, baby. Today we are concluding minimum effective dose number 6, all about Cbet principles. The first class in the series was just about that, Cbet principles, all the things you need to know to make great Cbets. The second class was about board textures. The third was about planning for the future and double barreling. And the fourth, the final class today, is about reacting to your opponent's Cbet defensive plays. You know, those pesky check raises, in-position raises, their floats, and their slow playing as well. I'll also get into a great video put out by Mark Warner over there at exceptionalpoker.com, and that video is all about combining fold equity with pot equity to determine when you should Cbet. Please visit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links and that video from Exceptional Poker. You can get everything by going to www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod137. While you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy direct to that inbox. Alrighty, it's time. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
Okay, so you've made the Cbet. Now what? Well, that all depends on how your opponents react. They fold, the hand's over, on to the next. Great. But what if they check raise? What about check calling, or maybe calling in position, or just raising you in position? Each of these plays are defensive strategies against the often expected Cbet. So, because they're common strategies, we've got to expect them and have a plan in place before we click that Cbetting button or before we throw the chips into the pot. Last episode, I talked about planning for the double barrel before you make the flop Cbet. Well, just as important is having a plan for each of these defensive plays. You should never be surprised at the table. If you're surprised by your opponent's check raise after your Cbet, you failed. Let's look at some example plans before you actually click that Cbet button. If that ultra lag check raises you on this hard to hit board, you know he's likely bluffing, so you can come back over the top to 3-bet him off his hand. Or maybe if that nit raises your pot-sized Cbet in position. Well, being a folding nit, he's probably got you crushed, and you could just fold your second pair hand. Or if that tag player just calls your Cbet in position, and you've seen her bet every single time it's checked to her, this is probably just another planned turn bluff. So, you're firing the double barrel no matter what. Or the last example, if that other tag player just calls your Cbet in position, and you know he's flop honest, so you suspect he's slow playing possibly, then you shouldn't barrel the turn unless it really hits your range and not his. In each of these examples, you Cbet for a good reason, and you knew ahead of time how you'll react to each of their possible defenses. So what are their possible defenses against your Cbet? Well, there's check raises, there are in-position Cbet raises, there are flop floats, and there's just the slow play, just calling with a great hand. Let's get into each of these in turn, and I'll discuss the following 3 aspects of each. Number 1, why are they making this play? Number 2, how to anticipate it. And number 3, what your plan should be. So we're going to start by talking about the everybody's favorite, or maybe least favorite if you hate facing them, the check raise. So why do players check raise? There's often 2 reasons for this. To build a pot with a set or better hand, or sometimes 2 pair or better. Or the second reason is to bluff you off early in the hand before the pot gets too big. Waiting for the turn to bluff might be scarier, and it's more likely to succeed, but it's often more costly, especially if they call that flop Cbet that you make. And how can you anticipate the check raise? Well, the first most important thing actually is taking note of every player who you see making check raise bluffs. Try to record the circumstances, things like the board and the player type that they check raised. The more info you have, the better you'll be able to anticipate and respond to check raises. You must also look at their check raise statistic before you Cbet. Make sure it's in one of your pop-ups, preferably the Fold to Cbet pop-up. If their check raise stat is high, like over 10% and definitely over 15%, they check raise bluff quite often, so you've got to plan for it. The lower the percentage, the more likely they do it for value. You can also anticipate the check raise by considering how well their pre-flop range hits the flop as soon as the dealer flops the cards. Let's assume they called your pre-flop 2-bet. So, are they calling you with a wide or a narrow preflop range? How does this range hit the King 7-6 or the 10-10 deuce or the Ace King Queen board? The harder their range hits, the more often you'll see a check raise for value. So your plan against the expected check raise, what should it be? It's actually pretty simple. There's three different aspects to this right here. Number 1, if you feel their check raise is likely a bluff, then you've got to re-bluff them. Don't go passive and just call in hopes that they don't fire the turn. Put the pressure back on them with a flop 3-bet. And the second thing, if you don't want to re-bluff versus the check raise, then you should either fold or not Cbet in the first place. Remember, if you hate the future, don't continue. If you think you'll be check raised and you will throw up in your mouth when it happens, don't Cbet in the first place. Just check behind and get to the turn for free. And if they're only making the check raise for value, then ditch your hand unless you're ahead of their value range. Like maybe you've got top set and you suspect a 2-pair or an underset is check raising you. The next play we want to talk about is the in-position Cbet raise. So why do players raise your Cbet in position? And this is very closely related to the check raise actually, but they're just in position this time. Being in position, these Cbet raises are more likely to work. They've seen your action and your sizing, and they can gauge if you're on a weak or a strong Cbetting hand. If they suspect weakness, this is the perfect time to pounce, because you'll often fold all of your bluffs due to the prospect of being out of position for the rest of the hand. Nobody likes to continue their bluffing from out of position versus a raise on the flop, so this is a very profitable bluffing strategy. All right, the next question is, how can you anticipate the in-position raise? Well, just like check raises, take note of players who are capable of doing this as a bluff and the sizing they use. There might be a difference in bluff raise sizing versus value raise sizing. Paying attention to bet sizing with showdowns is super valuable. You also want to look at their raise Cbet stat in your Fold to Cbet pop-up, and you should have this stat as a total, in position, and out of position. What? You don't have that? Well, put it in there, baby. Not in the HUD, but your Fold to Cbet pop-up should have the raise, flop, Cbet stat included. And of course, the turn and river as well. So let's talk about your plan against the in-position Cbet raise. And your plan here, really, it's the same as versus check raises. You're either folding to the raise if you believe them to be stronger and you can't compete, or you re-raise their bluff. Don't play it passively and go to the turn out of position after just calling on the flop. This makes your turn pots bigger and it makes your decisions even tougher. Also, if you barf after facing the in-position raise, then you probably shouldn't have Cbet in the first place. The third play to talk about versus your Cbets is the flop float. And an obvious question some of you might be asking is, hey Sky, what's a float? Well, a float is when you call a Cbet, either in position or out of position, with the intent to bluff on a later street after the opponent shows weakness. And this is most often a flop call in position. Then when the Cbetter checks the turn, they throw out a bluff. And why do players float the flop? They float the flop because they know most players are turn honest and they don't double barrel often enough. Turn honest players check or fold a lot on the turn, so they're easy to play against. The more astute and exploitative players love this play, and so should you. Floating can be done in position or out of position, like I said already, but mostly in position because it's easier to bluff you on the turn when you are out of position. Flop floaters are generally unbelieving players who see this as a great opportunity to bluff you off later. And sometimes these floats are from calling stations who just don't know what to do, and they're hoping that their under pair or their second or their third pair ends up being good. They aren't planning on betting the next street, but it might look like they will, so be prepared for that. Those calling stations look like they might just be floating. And how can you anticipate the float? Once again, you want to take note on players who call a lot of flops, then bet a lot of turns. That is key. It's important to note if they're doing this as a bluff or for value, so pay attention to showdowns as always, and make sure you watch to see if they fold after betting the turn. There are a couple of stats that can help you here, and this might be a little confusing, so bear with me, please. I'll try to explain this proper. Within Poker Tracker 4, they use some poker terms differently than we use them colloquially. The first of these are the float bets. So float the flop, float the turn, float the river. These are stats that tell you how often your opponent bets in position when the Cbetter checks instead of C-betting. It's nice and simple, these float bets here within Poker Tracker 4. The other one is the probe bet. Now, these are called probe the turn or probe on the river, and they show the percentage of the time that your opponent bets out of position after the Cbetter checked behind on the prior street. So I want you to learn these two stat differences to better help you anticipate these bluffing strategies. And what is your plan against the floats and probe bets? If you know your opponent is capable of either, then you've got to either double barrel or just do not throw out that initial C-bet. Capable players are waiting for you to show weakness. So if you're gonna show weakness, do it on the flop before you build the pot and lose even more money with an ineffectual flop C-bet bluff. Of course, if you've got a value hand versus a floater or a prober, then check the next street in order to get value from their bluffs. And the final play we want to talk about is slow plays. Now, why do slow players slow play their hand, basically? Well, we've all done it, you know. We've slow played the flopped nut flush, or the top set, or the sneaky straight with a like a hand like Queen 10 on King Jack 9. Well, why did we do it? I think the reason I do it is to lull my opponent into a false sense of security, either getting them to bluff when they think we can't have it, or getting them to value own themselves by betting strong yet inferior hands to my flopped nuts hand, you know, or even allowing them to catch up a little versus our unbeatable hand, like when we flop quads and we want them to catch some kind of a pair to give us some kind of a value. So the next question, how can you anticipate the slow play? As always, take note of slow players. If you see somebody check call the flop and the turn with the flopped full house or the nut flush, then they suddenly donk bet the river for full pot and they show their hand, you've got to record a play like this. Once again, the more you know about your opponent's tendencies, the better you'll be able to respond to plays like this and have the ability to see them coming. And you need to gauge how well their range interacts with the board and judge by their plays how likely they've got a strong hand. If the flop smacks their range and they call, but they're normally flop honest, then please be suspicious. If the turn also hits their range and they call a larger bet, be even more suspicious. So, pay attention to those key stats also. Fold to flop Cbet and fold to turn Cbet. Know when they're normally honest, and if they get beyond that honest street, danger, danger, danger. And what is your plan against the slow play? You need to first determine ahead of time how many streets of value your hand can normally get. If you flop an overpair, depending on the board, that might be only worth 2 or just 1 street of value. If your opponent is committing a ton of money, they've often got 1 pair beat. Also, if you're bluffing and they normally fold the flop and the turn, then don't bluff the river. When your play isn't likely to lead to the outcome you want, just don't make the play. Do you want to earn profits like a professional poker player? Now you can hit your profit goals with a little help from some extra professional level rakeback from Habwin. Check out www.habwin.com/getpokercashbacklikeapro. And that's all one word, of course. And go there to discover how you can get your cash back and more benefits when playing in your favorite poker rooms. Only at habwin.com/getpokercashbacklikeapro. And you can find my book, How to Study Poker, Volume 1, in every format on Amazon.com. Ebook, paperback, and audiobook, baby! Please leave an honest review and send it to me. I'd love to read it on air and give you a little shout out by name for supporting the show. Your reviews help spread the word. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. So last week, I told you about Mark Warner over there at exceptionalpoker.com and how he created a great video about making profitable Cbets. It's a pretty interesting concept that he discusses, and I'd like to share it with you here. So in this video, which you can find in the show notes for today, or on the Exceptional Poker YouTube channel, or on exceptionalpoker.com, within that video, Mark puts forth an idea that any bet you make is a function of combining pot equity and fold equity. And specifically in this video, Cbetting, of course. And pot equity is the percentage chance that you'll win the pot at showdown. Fold equity is how likely your opponent is to fold to a bet. So in every Cbet situation, you have a given amount of pot equity and fold equity. To determine whether you should Cbet or not depends on how much of either one you have. For pot equity, we need to compare the equity of our hand versus our opponent's range on the flop. For fold equity, we need to consider lots of possible variables within every hand. If you think about the number of opponents, the more opponents there are, the less fold equity we have. The type of opponents, if they're calling stations, less fold equity. The board texture, if it's a wetter texture or if it smacks our opponent's range, less fold equity, of course. We can also think of stack and pot sizes. So smaller stacks, bam, less fold equity once again. Cbet sizing, the smaller your Cbet, the less fold equity you have. You also want to think about your image. If you're bluffy, if they think of you as a bluffy player, of course you have less fold equity. And your position. If you are out of position on the hand or in the hand, then of course less fold equity. In the video, Mark discusses all of this, and then he unveils his Cbetting graph. You can find a screenshot of this in the show notes, so please go there to check it out. But the graph, just to explain it here, the graph is an XY axis graph with fold equity on the X axis, down below from left to right, and pot equity on the Y axis, up and down. So pot equity on the Y axis tells you where you are up and down on the graph. Fold equity tells where you are left to right on the graph. And there's a large diagonal line in the center going down from the top left to the bottom right. The top of this line is where you've got lots of pot equity. For example, you flop the nuts, and little fold equity, like he's got a great hand that he is just not folding. At the other end of the line, the bottom right, you've got little pot equity, like you're on a stone cold bluff. But you've got tons of fold equity, like the opponent is giving up 99% of the time in the bottom right. So if you're anywhere along this diagonal line, you should be Cbetting. If you're outside this line in the check and fold zone, which means you have no fold equity and no pot equity, then you shouldn't Cbet, because of course they won't fold and you've got zero chance of winning at showdown. In the other slow play zone, where you flop the nuts, for example, and your opponent is going to fold a ton, you shouldn't Cbet and just slow play to let them catch something on the next street. When you look at this graph, you can see that the Cbet line down the middle takes up about 75% of the graph. So you should be Cbetting on average 75% of the time, and the other 25% is made up of your slow plays and your check folds. To use this graph properly, it's key to estimate your pot equity and your fold equity with every Cbet opportunity. I really like Mark's take on the Cbet, and you can actually use this graph with any type of value bet or bluff bet on any street. It's truly worth your time to check out this graph on Cbets, and I hope I gave it justice here in audio form without the visual graph to show you. Please visit Mark's blog by going to www.exceptionalpoker.com. He sends out valuable weekly emails, and he's got plenty of great content there for you to learn from. And don't forget to head to today's show notes page to watch the Cbetting as a function of pot and Fold-Equities video that he created. I have it there within the page. And also, please like and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Challenge! Let me tell you something real quick. If you listen to this episode or any other poker content from anybody else, watch a video, read an article, read a book, listen to a podcast, whatever it is, if you consume that content and don't put something from it to use in your next play or your next study session, you are completely wasting your time. So, having said that, here's my challenge to you for this episode. Visit exceptionalpoker.com to learn from Mark and his Cbetting video. I guarantee this will open up a new way for you to view your Cbets, and if you follow what he discusses, you'll be all the more powerful for it. Print the graph for yourself, laminate it, stick it on your computer, paste it to your forehead, whatever you need to do, and use it in your next session. Estimate your situational pot equity and your fold equity, and if you fall within that central Cbet line, make the Cbet. Now it's your turn to take action and Scooby-Dooby-Doo something positive for your poker game.
Oh, that's it now. Get out there and be somebody. Go write a book.
This episode isn't complete until you head to the show notes page at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod137. You can go there for screenshots and links to everything discussed today, to find ways to support the podcast, and to watch Mark's video. And before the music kicks in, I want to give my shout-outs first because I've got so many to give. It was a great prior 2 weeks, and I'm so appreciative of all the support that you all have been sending my way. I know it sounds like I sound like a broken record, but I couldn't do it without you. So, first off here, Rui and Barry Yernshire, you purchased Poker Tracker 4 through my affiliate link. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. You are on your way to making yourself a super strong player just by using Poker Tracker 4. That HUD, the database resources it has, the ways to do reports and see statistics and all that jazz. Poker Tracker 4 is really going to up your game. And because you purchased it through me, I already sent you my smart HUD, so thank you very much. And speaking of the smart HUD, Daniel King purchased my smart HUD. Daniel, you the man, you awesome. Good luck with that. If you have any questions on how to use the smart HUD, please let me know. And on Patreon, Zach Stearns donated to me on Patreon. He set up a monthly donation to me. He is supporting me monthly. Zach Stearns, you rock super hard. And Omar Gutierrez as well. Thank you guys so very much for that monthly support on Patreon. And Mark Zakelli let me know via, I think it might have been via YouTube, that he purchased my book and he's loving it. I don't know if he's loving it, but he said he purchased it and I'm assuming he's loving it. But he was pretty eager to read it, so yeah, it's a good assumption. You're loving it, Mark. Thank you very much. And a book reviews. I got a great review from Danny Hanachak here. Let me read it. He titles it Must Buy for Serious Poker Players. Just received and began reading Sky's How to Study Poker book. It is a fantastic foundation for anyone trying to take their game seriously and make it more profitable. It's great on its own, but when used in conjunction with his podcasts, videos, and website, it's tremendous. I'm planning to create a binder with all of his website materials and helpful PDFs to use along with the How to Study Poker book to better my game. Not only are the book, website, pod, and video good resources, but Sky himself is also helpful. Not many poker authors will trade emails with you about poker topics. Sky will. I highly recommend this book to anyone not playing poker at my table. Hey, that's a good way to end that review. Thank you very much, Daniel. I really appreciate that. You're the man. I know I say that a lot. You the man, you the woman, everybody is the man or the woman who supports me. So thank you. And last weekend, I had my webinar, Getting the Most from Poker Tracker 4. So I have to thank everybody who purchased and then attended the webinar. Bob Brown, Adam Wandler, Stelios Galeklidis, Paolo Gaiotto, Gerald Perval, Ken Halbert, Steve Leahy, Wayne Henderson, Paul Trevane, Frank Rusakis, Daniel Silva Galvayo de Castro, and Eric Strachan. Thank you very much, all of you. I really appreciate it. If you have any PT4 questions, please let me know. And anybody else out there, just like Daniel said, send me a question, I'll send you an answer. Thank you so much for listening today, and thank you to our show sponsor today, Habwin.com. Please visit www.habwin.com/getpokercashback like a pro. Go there to sign up for a great cashback deal. All right, if you can type the words Smart Poker Study, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube, or send that email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com. Alrighty, poker people, next week in episode 138, I'll hit the first class in the minimum effective dose number 7, Poker Math. We'll talk expected value, fold equity, break-even math, outs and odds, pot equity, basically everything mathematical in the upcoming 4 episodes, so stay tuned. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing this show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.